This is The Baseline, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. Welcome, everybody. You're tuned to The Baseline. Callie Warrenshaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA, and we keep things moving along a little bit closer to the NBA. Regular season coming to an end, but as always, man, we always got to keep that conversation rolling. So it's that time, man. Got throw on them white coats, and we continue our efforts in our Autopsy Report series. Who none better to do it with than my brother from another mother, my man, Mr. Warren Shaw, ripping out of Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Obviously on relocation mode right about now, for the short time being. What's good, man? I think we're neighbors. Would you like to borrow some sugar?
This guy out here chilling, visiting your neck of the woods and trying to make it work, make it do what it do, as they say. But excited to be here, man, and can't believe it. We're literally like a week away from the season being concluded. So final 6-7 games here for most teams. It's been a journey, right? And we'll see how the playoffs ultimately land and shake out. The Western Conference continues to be extremely exciting. Eastern Conference is exciting as well. But literally, like, teams are following 4 slots by losing 1 game in the West. It's insane. So this next week and a half here is going to be a lot of great fun for the NBA fans.
Yeah, the swing in the standings, I think, stand out the most, Shaw. To really give people proper perspective about this, 1 game can literally drop you almost out of the play-in. That's how tight everything is. And look, we'll talk about this as we start expounding on playoff situations and when we have to do our previews for the play-in tournament and for the teams that will eventually round out what's going to be the playoff picture for this season. But this is probably the first time where we actually have to speak to the fact that every game now really matters to the very end, when you're talking about figuring out or configuring what the playoff picture is really going to look like. And for those teams who had opportunities to separate themselves from the rest of the pack, they have not been able to do it. And I think you could also make an argument that, maybe before we used to put it more on the players, but I just really think that this is the competitive play at work here with the NBA. And, look, kudos to the NBA as well, too, because even with the way that the schedules have lined themselves up, it really doesn't depict, a whole lot into the idea that, one team has a weaker schedule than the other. Literally every single team is still vested really up until the very end, even the teams who've already secured their playoff spot. It really speaks volumes to the competitive nature that every game now really matters and teams aren't, taking nights off.
Yeah, at the end of the day, we can just continue to have the same conversation every year. The play-in has made the season more valuable towards the end, ever more than ever before, because seeding was always something that teams were jockeying for, and really kind of maybe the 1 through 5, 7, whatever the case may be. But because there are literally 10 spots that can get you a chance into this, or really kind of 2 extra spots, really kind of thinking at the tail end. A lot of those teams that maybe haven't had the best seasons might be just around 500 or a little bit below. It keeps them live and keeps them trucking to the end of the season. So the play-in situation has created a lot more intrigue and competitiveness throughout the course of the regular season, more than ever before.
And one other thing, before we get right into our autopsy reports for this week, Shaw, I think the other thing as well, too, that you take into consideration with this is nobody wants to be a one and done situation when it comes to getting into the playoffs, right? Like, if you are one of the teams that really worked hard to be among one of the top 6, you don't want to have to justify your season coming down to 1 game essentially, before you get booted out. Now I know, they set it up so that, if you're the 7th seed and you lose, you'll wind up having to play whoever the winner is. But what I'm just saying is that it just gives that feel for like you work hard to give yourself an opportunity, to play in a best of 5, in a best of 7, and to only have 1 game be the difference between whether or not you're only going to play 1 game in order to compete, or actually give yourself an extended shelf life to compete in the tournament. I think also, plays well. I mean, plays great for our entertainment value, but I mean, any team would not want to be giving that that type of shot or opportunity for what they've had to put themselves through to get to this point.
Yeah, well said. Yeah, it's almost like NCAA tournament style. You know what I mean? Almost a one and done situation. So
Grown man NCAA style. That's what grown folk business. Listen, we got a great show on tap for you guys, and we really appreciate you hopping on board with us this week as we continue our autopsy report series. We got two teams that we're gonna dig into. Obviously, their seasons came to an end very, very early on. So we got to talk about their future, and we're going to be talking about the Charlotte Hornets and the Houston Rocket in this week's edition of the Autopsy Report. As always, be sure to get at my man Shaw at Shaw Sports NBA. Get at me at Game Face Lead, the show's Twitter handle at NBA Baseline. Available on all the major platforms. You know where to find us. If you want to see our show or hear our show, go to www.thebaselinenba.com so you can catch this episode and all of the episodes that we have dropped for your listening pleasure. For those of y'all watching, hello. You can always catch us on YouTube, but also check us out when you see that 19 Media logo. You know that we rocks with the 19 Media Group family. We be running these content streets so to catch us and all of the great shows that are out there. Great personalities, great storylines, great discussions, great content. Go to www.19mediagroup.com. So, without further ado, you know how we do, you know how we roll. Let's do a little autopsy here on the baseline. Time to break it down. I break it down to the bone gristle. Time now for the breakdown. Lee Warrenshaw, Baseline NBA podcast, and this is our coveted autopsy report where Shaw and I throw on the white coats and we get to basically go through the cadaver that is the teams who have exited stage left. Right now, we're working on those teams that died a quick death in this NBA season. And the first team that we're going to kind of log in on are going to be the Charlotte Hornets. Now, the Charlotte Hornets, Shaw, I find them to be a very mercurial team to examine because there's so much that goes on with this team off the court. They are one of the few teams that quite simply cannot do anything off the court that can elevate this franchise or this team to a sustainable level on the court. With all of the growing commotion about, Michael Jordan selling his stake, so he'll probably wind up being a minority owner. Um, it just lends itself so much to this mentality of they just can't catch a break. And when you look at the roster and you look at the plethora of players who have kind of danced in and out of that organization, all of them and the whole situation, it just doesn't feel like they can catch a break. And it kind of sucks because for the Charlotte Hornets, every year you want to believe that they're going to be a team that can really compete, but it just seems like short, sustained, they're the type of team that just seems like you'll only get like in short spurts this level of competitiveness from them, but it's not through and through. And they just don't have the empowerment within themselves to really step up and establish themselves. And I'm just wondering, what is it going to take for that team to finally come into their own, the organization to come into their own, the fan base to come into their own and really be legitimize themselves as being a part of the conversation of a sustained, well-ran, competitive organization.
So there's a lot to unpack, I think, there. Trying to start with your last question, what's it going to take? It's going to take leadership, leadership that wants and needs to be there. So it's interesting that, MJ would be selling his majority share and then bringing in potentially, a new majority share owner. They just brought in Clifford in for the second time. Obviously, we've had many conversations about that and what that ultimately looked like for them. But they need to nail a draft pick for once, really and truly. So, as luck would have it, let's take you on a quick journey. Bridges does whatever he does, and truly, truly, truly important situation that he's involved in. More obviously, more so for the victim. in domestic violence situation that he had. But that's somebody who they thought was going to be a major part of their team. They bring in Clifford, as I alluded to. Uh, LaMelo starts the season basically on the shelf, plays well when healthy, but doesn't have just doesn't healthy the majority part of the year. Kelly Oubre battles injuries the majority part of the year. Hayward takes his annual siesta, as to be expected. Terry Rozier started the year, battling injuries as well. Cody Martin injured, so Dennis Smith even injured. Book Knight not a good prospect for them, as currently projected. The best thing they have going for them outside of LaMelo is PJ Washington has played well, but he's a free agent. And then maybe Mark Williams and Nick Richards, some of the bigs have played okay for them as well. But this team just hasn't had the continuity that it thought it was going to, and that it absolutely needed to be even remotely successful. But fast forward now to the latter part of the season where multiple guys are now out. They have somehow found a way to string some wins together, which is probably the worst thing they could do at this point of the season, because now, they're furthering their chances away from getting a higher lottery pick. And that's what they need. They need to really try to be within that top three. And now it's a little less likely that they'd get a top three pick, probably still, 5 to 6 or something like that. But it's just been a nightmare season for the Charlotte Hornets. And I think it's unfortunate, but they need continuity and they need to nail a draft pick immediately.
I like where you're going with it. I would want to agree with you on that in that regard that they have to land on the draft pick. But look, they drafted LaMelo Ball, and by all accounts, minus his injuries, LaMelo Ball was among one of the most exciting basketball players, that they probably have had in their franchise history. Most of the other players that they've taken on have been quote unquote experiments. The Kemba Walkers, the PJ Washingtons, um, the Gerald Wallaces. Like a lot of the essence have been them kind of rolling the dice on some players and these players because you know the Hornets found back then even Bobcats, Hornets, the organization, the feel and the entity about them has always been like this pseudo admiration. Hey, the losers come over here and make a name for themselves so that they can go out, secure a bag, get paid buku bucks, get that one great signing for themselves, and then again disappear off into the sunset. It just never feels sustainable with them. And so I often wonder, Shaw, to the point, is it just really just the draft pick that you hit on with this? Because I think at the end of the day, what then becomes is the vicious cycle that, yeah, let's say he becomes, an all-star player for them. If they don't win basketball games, if they don't show a level of competitiveness even within their own division, which among the other conference in the Eastern Conference, among the other divisions, is really the weakest of all of them. If they can't sustain a level of competitiveness in that division, let alone the conference, everyone's just going to buy into the idea that, again, the Charlotte Hornets are essence kind of like the Charlotte Hornets, in which then a superstar player or an all-star player becomes disgruntled, and then he's going to want out, and they become like the Pelicans version of the Eastern Conference, which I don't think anybody wants at this moment in time.
Well, let me say this. LaMelo's obviously a home run, right? They landed that 1,000%, and they need to be, I think, within that range, right? They need to have a somewhere top 5 draft pick. Things that they're doing within the latter stages of the lottery and mid rounds, like they just haven't had good talent evaluation. LaMelo in some ways fell into their lap because maybe some of the teams just didn't believe the hype, if you will. But great, kudos for them. They were able to make that move. But now you got to build on that,
Right.
And I think it's not about investing on people who don't fit your timeline or your roster. Uh, Call it whatever you want. Gordon Hayward's contract will be up at the end of next season. If he doesn't get moved, before the season starts, they would potentially. I'm sure he's going to be a name that not a lot of teams are going to be interested, but they're going to shop him heavily if they're not able to move him in the offseason, but definitely maybe trade deadline, or they may just try to buy him out. And I don't think he'll take it, but they can give it a shot. What do they do with Kelly Oubre? He was solid for them in the minutes he played this year, but again, as I alluded to, was mostly injured for like 40, 50 games of the season. So the biggest question is PJ Washington. So I think when you take all of this back, you have LaMelo, yes, building block, but what are you surrounding him, or what are you surrounding him with? Is Clifford the right fit for where they want to go? Do they need to bottom out another year? Because I don't think they're a free agent destination, right? And they'll have some money. They'll have some money, especially if they don't resign Oubre, if they don't resign Washington, as well. Then they'll have a lot of money. They can figure out what they want to do with Book Knight and Kai Jones and guys like that too. Those are going into their third and fourth years respectively. But at the end of the day, um, it's about what they surround Mello with, and I don't know if he's going to be somebody who's going to go on the recruiting tour one way or the other, and what new ownership, if that does take place here before next season starts, what they'll be looking to try to do. But to me, this roster is just not as talented as it wants to be. And while I love Scary Terry, that's one of my young sons. I don't know if he's long for this process as well, and if he's the right building block around alongside LaMelo. And those are things Charlotte and Mitch Kupchak and everybody like that need to figure out immediately.
Well, okay, so I'm going to ask you to put your GM hat on real quick, Shaw, because you highlighted a very important point to me that I'm going to make in a moment. But I wanted to ask you this then. So you think that the Charlotte Hornets should be all in on building with or building around LaMelo Ball?
Yeah, I think he's in the few years that we've seen him. I think he's proven to be a guy who can make his teammates better, not just because he's statistically and almost averaging triple doubles and all of that, when he plays, but he puts butts in seats, and again, he makes his teammates better. So to me, that's the starting block. You have a point guard who can control, and I won't say master the game, but control the game to a certain degree, and he's only getting better. So I think he's the right fit for what they ultimately need to do in a city that struggles to bring that level of excitement, about their franchise. He's somebody who can definitely do that, and hopefully, by virtue of that, also be even if he doesn't openly outwardly say, "Hey, Cal Lee, I want you to play on my team." Is his skill set something attractive enough where almost like Devin Booker in Phoenix, where KD was looking from afar and says, "Hey, I'd love to play with D Book one day," and hopefully LaMelo has that type of gravitas that maybe the next upcoming free agent is looking like, "Hey, you know what? I can go there and be a great teammate alongside LaMelo."
Yeah, so I'm not going to disagree with you that if you are Mitch Kupchak, to validate the fact that you went with getting LaMelo Ball, you have to assume that LaMelo Ball is a key piece. He is what's going to drive the engine for how you're going to construct this team moving forward. I do think, though, that part of that process in getting to that point, Shaw, is recognizing what the future of this team needs to be like. And I'm just talking about it from an unconventional sense of the word, that it's not even so much Steve Clifford. I think Steve Clifford and LaMelo Ball could actually work. Remember, Steve Clifford was very much involved in elevating and preserving the career of Kemba Walker, who,
Sure.
sometimes you need a wily veteran coach that knows how to take care of superstar players who have a history of not being able to stay healthy for a duration. Part of that, though, is going to come down to Mitch Kupchak's moves, so to speak, to supplement what you could get out of the combination of Clifford and LaMelo Ball. With that being said, I would think that if you're Kupchak, you go completely opposite of the idea that you got to go out and use free agency and bring guys in. The Charlotte Hornets, weirdly enough, Shaw, have had a good track record of drafting quality players, good quality role players who could find their way playing for a struggling organization and a struggling fan base, like for the Charlotte Hornets. We've seen this kind of in and out mode with the Charlotte Hornets. Every couple of years or so, they put together a quality team who competes. They find themselves hanging around either to play in or maybe actually make the playoffs. And even if they are a first round exit, whatever the case may be, the problem is they do something post that season that wrecks the whole thing. I think they've never fully committed to the idea that they should have a young, gutty, gritty team to work with. They're always hedging their bets. We do the same thing when we complain about the Orlando Magic because we can't figure out what kind of roster they're going to put together. But I think that this has been the MO with the Charlotte Hornets over the last few years as well too. They somehow don't fully commit to whether they want to be young, they wanted to be, this blend, this hybrid of. I think that if you want to have an effective team for Clifford to coach, you really need to start focusing in on the guys that they're drafting, taking advantage of guys that may even pull from the G League, whatever. But I think you need to bring a little bit more to the table and not do it via through the draft if you're Mitch Kupchak. I'm sorry, free agency if you're Mitch Kupchak.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
And that does
it's
mean
hard.
you got to move these dudes. Like they've served their purpose. You know,
Yeah, I
Rozier.
mean, PJ Washington is has been more than solid, right? And I think they got to figure out, do they want to keep him and retain him long term? I think it goes back to some of their previous, all their decisions are always, to me, somewhat rooted in some question. The decision to bring Hayward in at that number specifically was questionable, and once again, he played 50, he'll play 55 games max, roughly the end of this year. They obviously didn't expect LaMelo to only play 36 games, right? Like that really was the worst part of their season by far and away. And Cody Martin played 7 games and was just never to be heard from again due to his injuries. Um, I don't know. Charlotte is not devoid of talent, but I don't know if they have a true direction. Their offense is really, really bad. It's really, really, really bad. And yeah, LaMelo fixes a good portion of that, but he doesn't get them from 29th, 30th, even into the teens, right? He might get them up a couple, 3, 4 spots, but not 15 spots, even to like middle of the pack. So they got to figure out a way to get better on that side of the basketball, specifically, and just shooting. And, he can help set some guys up, once he's back. But to me, they need to figure out a way to, again, get stronger offensively, get some 3-point shooting specifically, and then figure out who are the main studs that they're trying to bring around them. And hopefully they end up with a top 5 draft pick that allows them to get somebody to pair LaMelo alongside. A lot in our last conversation and all of our conversations with these teams that are already eliminated. Yeah, everyone's in the Wembanyama sweepstakes, but only one team can get them. Right. And, I said last week, I'd love for LaMelo to pair alongside that type of big. And Charlotte's been looking for a big man that they can just say, hey, this is our guy for years. Ironically, Plumlee was having the best year of his career. Then they promptly shipped him out to the Clippers because, well, they weren't going anywhere. So Charlotte, to me, is just they're a little bit lost. But they're not too far off from the ability to, as you alluded to, get back into some level of viability where they can at least be competing like everybody else seems to be in the Eastern Conference for the play-in tournament.
Absolutely. My final thought, Shaw, and then I'll let you lead into your eulogy, for the Charlotte Hornets, is really more centered on what does this team look like with LaMelo Ball, and I wonder about this because you have the notion, the premonition that like the way that they play, to your point, offensively, reminds you a lot like I don't know, um, those those city league teams where you got like the coach who really doesn't have coaching experience. You got a really exciting player and you just give him open, carte blanche. Just do whatever you guys got to do. Just make it look like you guys know how to play basketball, right? We'll work on some, simple drills. We'll play like we're organized. And I'm not speaking of this in the sense that I'm like, oh, Steve Clifford doesn't know what he's doing. Steve Clifford is one of the most recognized and respected coaches in the game of basketball. But I even think his biggest struggle is being able to figure out an offensive system that's going to work for a guy like LaMelo Ball. And I think the only way that you're going to really be able to truly see that is you're going to have to put pieces around LaMelo that doesn't reflect LaMelo, that challenges LaMelo, that forces him to become a more well-rounded basketball player. And I think that's where the danger lies in the process of acquiring the kind of talent that you're saying, Shaw, that they're going to probably need. for a moment, just even forget about competitiveness. I'm just saying that when you see how LaMelo Ball plays his brand of basketball, that might seem good in the short term and might, turn some heads, wow some heads. But for some of those players, even whether they're young or, somewhere trying to find their or spark their career, they're going to want to figure out how they can fit in with a dynamic player like LaMelo. And it's going to behoove LaMelo Ball for his evolution. And part of it is staying on the court, being healthy. But his evolution is really going to come down to his ability to figure out how to make his team better. And that's going to be a great challenge that you will see with the Charlotte Hornets, because a lot of the years of the success for the Hornets has always been predicated on one player trying to save them, when it really should come down to a whole team. Like the teams that are winning right now is when, yeah, they have a dynamic player, but that dynamic player's evolution is figuring out ways to accentuate what makes their team unique, their players unique, or the team elevating to a level when it calls for it or demands for it.
There's some people out there who may say LaMelo is more flash than substance right now. Not exactly empty calories, but more flash. And yeah, can you make more simple plays at times? And sure, I believe all that, but I think he's going to get there. And I think he's shown the ability to understand. And each year, even this year when he played, he was better than he was a year before.
Right.
So he's got to stay on the court first and foremost. And I think again, it just kind of continues to go back to, all right, well, who's out there alongside him? And then something you said kind of struck me. When it comes to your teams in your organization, it's not always, it doesn't always have to be about the star guy or the upper echelon coach. Sometimes it can be even a top-notch assistant or somebody who's on the rise, on the come up, who makes subtle tweaks to the offense or the defense that just gets the team kind of moving in the right direction and brings them some level of cohesion. So I think they just need to take, and I'll just kind of go into the soliloquy of the autopsy like fully here. Take full stock of what your roster is. Take full stock of who's on the sideline alongside Clifford. And I'm not knocking Clifford or anybody that's currently there, but 29th and 30th, in terms of your offense, top offensive statistics that's not great.
No.
LaMelo or otherwise. So figure out a way to, revamp that. And maybe bring in a different voice who can maybe resonate with some of those guys. And then you don't have to get rid of Clifford in essence to do that, or even undermine him. Just get somebody who maybe is just better offensively minded gifted. Clifford has always been a defensive minded coach. And then maybe that can shift things in the direction that it ultimately needs to go, alongside with whatever draft pick they get. Maybe they move off of Hayward, maybe they don't. Maybe they flip Oubre, maybe they don't. But I think, again, as we've talked this through some, this team is close to being at least competitive, even if they bring everybody back, just with some subtle changes.
Yeah, maybe that's what it takes. Like when we have to fix up, you know what I'm saying, the body, right? You can tweak it a little bit here. Tweak it. Just we just want to bury them ugly, right? We want to make them look nice. So
Yeah,
that's the overall goal. All right, let's
give them a little Botox
yeah,
before
yeah,
we
a
put them in the
little
coffin.
Charlotte getting a little Botox, right? You're tuned to the baseline. Callie, Warren, Shaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA as we continue our efforts here on the Autopsy Report. Coming up, Sean and I will break down the second team that we got on docket for the Autopsy Report. We'll be talking about the Houston Rockets. Now, they are going to probably need an extreme makeover, or maybe not. I don't know. I just felt like I had to say that, but you'll find out where we're coming from here on the baseline. We are back. Callie, Warren Shaw, Baseline NBA Podcast, as we continue our Autopsy Report. And the next team that we're going to basically exhume and examine will be the Houston Rockets. Now, typically when we do our autopsy reports, I rattle off all of these, numbers and, try to validate, part of where we see that this team is not good and struggling, and or what it's going to take for them to elevate. We're not going to bore you with all of that, right? I think once we start moving up, you know what I'm saying, our autopsies on some other teams, we could really dissect and really look at, what what was successful with the failures for certain teams. I think it's real easy. Teams like the Houston Rockets and the Charlotte Hornets and the teams that we'll be talking about over the next coming weeks, they were not good on either side of the basketball. But Shaw, I think something really sticks out at me when I think about this Houston Rockets team. And you know me, I have, I speak my piece when especially I, focus a lot more on the coaching aspect of things because obviously I think coaching matters, especially in the NBA. But I think you also have to take a look at how the rosters are being constructed and what's the vision. What is the end goal? Over the last few years, we've seen, Stephen Silas. He's had to work with quite an eclectic bunch of guys, right? Very young, right? Very wet behind the ears. But the one thing that I will say that really concerns me is I don't know if I'm finding an identity with this Houston Rockets team, even with the star players that they have. I don't know if whether or not I'm seeing Stephen Silas's imprint on the core players that have been drafted and are on this roster. And then I will equally say as well too for Raphael Stone as the GM, what exactly are you what exactly are you focusing on for this team that is giving Steven Silas an opportunity to have an imprint on how he coaches that team, right? Like certain moves you can tell the GMs are making are clearly in the best interest of building up the team and giving his head coach really being behind his head coach. I don't know if I see that with this Houston Rockets team, Shaw. And the fact that we're now doing this for a second year in a row, I'm gonna let the first year that Steven came in as the head coach go to pass because he was dealing with a lot of turmoil with John Wall, and that whole situation and stuff. But now we're in the third year of this supposed to be rebuilding process. And I don't even know if I've seen the materials make it to the construction site yet.
Yeah, they are a team that is a lot of young guys. They have some picks coming their way, obviously as a result of the James Harden trade. But you're right. I think Silas is probably like, I waited all this time to get a head coaching job, and look at this pile of crap I just kind of walked into in terms of the situation, not the people, not the players, but just the situation and how it all meshes together. He's got to be frustrated, and while Jalen Green is somebody who's going to be a high level scorer in this league for a very long time, I don't know that he's somebody you build your team around, right? I don't know that yet. I think he's going to be a guy who can get buckets, and that can get you to a certain level of success. But he's got to do it in a different way that I don't know that he's developed yet. Kevin Porter is probably one of the most disliked people on Twitter outside of Houston, in terms of the way they think his basketball IQ is and some of the mistakes he makes and whatever. But I think he's grown. But is he the solution at point guard long term? Probably not, right? And he's not a natural point guard, but he's grown into being at least serviceable for what the Rockets are right now, but not who the Rockets ultimately probably need to be long term. Then you take Sengun, who seems to be, we use this term a lot, but Walmart brand, Jokic. He's not quite as prolific, obviously, but he's showing some signs of being good. Jabari Smith had an okay rookie season, started to come on here late, closing the season off pretty strong, but there's some pieces here. Torrey Eason even. He's had some nice moments coming off the bench, and we all know what Kenyon Martin Jr. has looked like at times in terms of being a role player. So but it just doesn't work, for sustainable winning. And yes, they're young. Yes, there's more growth to do, even from Silas's standpoint as a head coach now as well. But he's supposed to be one of the better offensive minds, and the Rockets are last in offense and shooting threes. We talked about Charlotte; they were next to last, and now we have the last place team, with the Houston Rockets. So they've got to figure out how to be more efficient, first and foremost. But really, listen, you can take what John Wall said with a grain of salt, but I think we all see it as we're watching. Yeah, they do need to learn how to play with more poise, especially down the stretch of games. And it's been said that they are just kind of like they're devoid of real structure. And if other NBA players are critiquing that, John Wall, Austin Rivers, people like that who have had those criticisms of them, then that's something that Silas and Stone need to address. They need to figure out, all right, how do we get a true veteran who can help us here, as opposed to just rolling the balls out and letting the chips fall where they may.
So there's a lot to unpack on that. I'm gonna let that sit for a moment, and let me just speak on this one thing that I just thought about from what you were just saying a few moments ago. I think maturity plays such an important role in being able to see the forest, through the trees, right? Um, the problem that I'm seeing from all of these players is, while it seems nice and exciting and it's cool because among your peers, right? Your age limit, your age group of guys, because you can make the argument that like they have a very young team, right? Now that Eric Gordon is gone, John Wall's not playing on that squad. Um, they have an extremely young basketball team who has no idea how to compete and play in the NBA. And maybe that's a good thing. Maybe that, it's a fresh start. And losing the way that you do to some of the teams that you're playing against may humble you in really taking this off season to figure out certain things that you have to get better at, be marketably improved at. The problem is, and I think it's to the point that you were mentioning, Shaw, because this could lead to the frustration of Steven Silas. If you're someone who's been involved in the NBA ranks and you've had the ability to be in the ear of certain players and you could watch their growth, you could watch their maturation process, come of age, so to speak. You feel proud because you were a part of that. All of these guys show such a high level of immaturity in their ability to figure these things out that it moves in contrast to the window of opportunity that the organization and even the head coach is going to have to figure out how to get this right. It's different if we're giving these guys a 5-year window to do things. But the way that players operate, the way that players move, the way that organization sees certain things, the way that they're losing basketball games, the effectiveness that the coach has in the locker room and out on the basketball court, all of that accelerates what takes place in really saying, do I want to sit pat, let this thing play itself out? Maybe these guys figure this out, form together, and take that next step, or do I just am settled on the idea that as exciting as these guys are out there on the basketball court, not one of them is ever going to figure out how to compete and elevate and mature and lead a team. And I think that's going to be one of the big questions. And typically, what saves that question from even having to be answered is if you have a head coach who can have a very quick imprint on that, on addressing that question. And I'll say this, and to say, Shaw, the Rockets had a JB Bickerstaff. The Cleveland Cavaliers and Altman, they put their faith in the fact that JB Bickerstaff is going to have an imprint on that young team, and look at what those guys are doing. And that's what
Yeah.
I'm saying. There's a danger here with the Houston Rockets, because to your point, there's a lot of great things. Like if you break down all of their numbers and stuff, there's something good there. They can score the basketball. There can be excitement there. They got guys that can play above the rim, right? But what does it mean anything to if it's not translating to wins and the maturity of seeing that happen? I think is a scary proposition for the Houston Rockets, because you don't want to be where they've been the last couple of years with this kind of youthful exuberance that people should feel about exciting basketball that can be played down there.
Yeah, you'd figure, as again, Silas being an offensive mind coming from Dallas and one of the most historic offenses when he was there under Luka, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now I misspoke. They're 27th in offensive rating, 30th in 3-point shooting, 30th in three pointers made. And then you go to 30th in turnovers. So they don't take care of the basketball. But one of the most damning stats for me, dead last in assists. So they're out there not really playing for each other. And again, somebody has to be last in assists, I guess. Right? I mean, it's a ranking. Somebody's going to finish last, but you wouldn't necessarily you don't want it to be your team. And you wouldn't necessarily expect it to be, this team that has so many offensive talent. Like they could just fall into some assists. They share the basketball more. And again, this isn't an indictment on Porter Jr. specifically. Sengun is again showing himself to be a capable passer like that too, but there's no real natural playmakers on the roster. And that means everybody's kind of going out there, your turn, my turn, my turn again. And I think those are what's coming down to, some of those disappointing losses and some of those high turnovers that they also see. So this is a team that has some capability. They're not devoid of talent. You could put their actual raw skill and talent up against a lot of other teams, but where I think they are probably lacking the most is what you just said, the actual discipline. And I don't want to utilize, because I don't think they're not stupid, but the basketball IQ, the in-game situations that they have been in, they haven't performed well in yet. And they just need more repetition in that and ways to figure out now, okay, well, how do we not blow this game this time? Because you might fight hard for 3.5 quarters and then you lose a game at the end. To me, this Rockets team can be a lot better. I don't think that they're going to jump into the conversation of the play-in, next year, even with a high draft pick. I just don't see that, because I think there's a lot of growth that needs to happen here. But they are talented in terms of the raw talent. They just all got to work hard and work together. And I'd love to see, the workout videos with the Rockets this summer. Hey, Kevin Porter Jr. and Jalen Green gathered everybody over in Wyoming, to work out and just try to come together, and with whatever draft pick they end up getting, and seeing how they can work on some of the repetition and the reps that they need in essence to be better when it comes to regular season. But again, I think they have some talent here, but it's just going to look like it's going to be a little bit further, a longer drive than I think some of the teams we've talked about earlier.
Well, let me ask you this question, Shaw. If you are the Houston Rockets, right? Do you focus your attention on drafting more, right? Like looking forward to, you have a potential lottery pick, right? With this team come
Yeah.
this upcoming draft class, right? Do you consider the idea maybe you move that in order to maybe acquire a veteran player? Because that always seems to be, the go-to move whenever we talk about a team's lack of maturity, so to speak. They need a veteran presence. And I'm not mocking anything that we've been talking about, y'all, because that typically is what happens, right? Like I go get a veteran guy and we think that he's going to help improve the locker room. But I see a dichotomy here that's taking place when we talk about this type of talent that you're referring. I think the thing that concerns me when I look at this team is, can this team together get better? And if so, can they figure out the roles and responsibilities that each person will take it upon themselves to help this team improve on a lot of the metrics that you had alluded to just a few moments ago, right? Because part of that conversation, Shaw, when
Mm-hmm.
I think about the Kevin Porter Juniors and the Jalen Greens and, the Jabari Smiths and the Senguns and the Martin Juniors this is a free form team, but ultimately somebody has got to captain this ship. you know. So does that mean if you're Jalen Green that you take a step back and worrying about being the point guard, so to speak, of scoring the basketball all the time and worry more about getting guys where they need to be, showing more leadership? Or should that fall on a Jabari Smith Jr.? Or should that fall on a Kevin Porter? Who's going to be the defensive anchor for that team? Could it be a Kenyon Martin Jr.? Like there's so many undefined roles, but the talent is so much there. And even I myself, when I see them play, Shaw, I don't know where I would put the onus on those guys. If you gave me an off season for them to say, you take on this role, you take on that role. And it's not even saying, oh, they do each of these things really well. What I'm saying is they're just doing their own thing, right? Like you just alluded to that. They're doing their own thing. But I don't know whatever of that thing is what's going to equate to us figuring out what they're going to look like even when they come back for next season. Like we'd have to
So,
see something change up that narrative where where they can speak more to what it is that they want to see themselves improve upon as a team.
well, I mean, again, the fact that they have at least the potential for such a high draft pick makes them extremely malleable. And I think it's, if it's Wemby, he projects as your building block. If it's Scoot, maybe projects as your building block, and then you move Jalen Green up to the three or something like that. I think again we continue to maintain that there's talent on this roster, but are any of them the true building blocks of what you want a team to become? And those are questions that do come with some semblance of role definement. So where does this draft pick land? However, let's not get down this rabbit hole too far. But there are rumors and some that think James Harden may want to return. I don't know about all that. Like I don't know if I don't know if that's good for this team, and especially the way it's currently constructed. But it is something that is potentially on the horizon. Then take into account, in addition to their own pick, they also have two other first round picks this year. They have first round picks next year and multiple seconds next year, and then two first round picks in 25 again. So they could very easily cobble some stuff together if they wanted to try to fast track it. But what does that look like? And does it, whoever you bring in, who do you ship out? You know what I mean? Who do you ship out as a result of that? I think Kevin Porter is probably the most likely candidate. He also makes roughly $18 million, so it's a nice salary that can match, in other deals. Jalen Green still on his rookie deal, so to speak. So obviously Jabari and Sengun, all of that.
I think I lost you, Shaw. Still there? Froze up.
Because I just don't think that's the route that they should go. But if there is somebody who becomes available, the Rockets could be at least throwing their names in the hat specifically, and hopefully they just do the right thing. Again, we don't know how this Kyrie Irving thing is going to go and wind up in Dallas. Do they try to get involved in that? Just bring him across town. I don't know. I think the Rockets but they need some serious, clear role definement, as you alluded to. I think that was an amazing point.
Yeah, so I mean, one of the things that you talk about with this Houston Rockets team is the fan base themselves. I think are going to be patient, but I think they're only going to be patient for so long. We've seen somewhat of a slippage, so to speak, in what the Southwest Division um, has afforded them. So while the Dallas Mavericks may still, be relevant because they're hanging around in the play-in, and now they're in six as we're recording this. I'm sure this is going to change and flip flop. The New Orleans Pelicans have taken a step back, but a lot of it is due to Zion Williamson not being available. And the San Antonio Spurs have just been a bad basketball team. So where we thought that this division itself was going to basically leave the Houston Rockets, you know what I'm saying, in their Spurs, in their boots and Spurs, right? There's a window where the excitement of some of the players that come out and they compete, they show some signs of playing exciting basketball. There's something there, but I do also caution the idea as well too that they got to make the right moves now, you know, moving forward. And in haste, we've seen when the Houston Rockets don't do that. So
Yeah.
it'll be interesting to see, how they look at this particular season. And I I'm more so curious, Shaw, who is definitively going to speak to those roles that you were talking about before. If there was somebody that you wanted to really be quote unquote the head of the snake for this team, not necessarily by the numbers, but just from what you've been able to see so far this year, who do you really think should be the top dog for this basketball team?
Yeah, I think it's tough for me. Most people are going to say Jalen Green. I think Sengun is showing some chops, but I don't know enough about him. His personality and understanding. Can he be a locker room type guy and leader and somebody who galvanizes the roster and team? It doesn't always have to be a guy who scores the most points. And I think that's going to be Jalen Green, but it can be. And if he's willing to take that maturity step, then awesome. I don't think will be any of the rookies they bring in, even if it's Wemby, Brandon Miller, Scoot Henderson, whoever they bring in. I think whoever that is going to be looking for somebody to lean on and just kind of go out there and hoop, but not necessarily, lead by, not necessarily lead in the locker room, but maybe lead more from example. So that vocal voice maybe is a Sengun type, maybe it can be Jalen Green. I think Kevin Porter thinks he can do it. I don't know that he's up to the task, but I think it's hard. But the one thing that you touched on that's really also true is if they decide to make a move by virtue of all the picks they have, or by virtue of just having a crap ton of money, they only have $6 to $8 million committed in salary. That's a crap ton of money, and they don't need to go out here and blow it. They don't, that's not what they need to do at all. But they're well below the cap, especially after getting John Wall and Aaron Gordon off their books. So they have a lot of options, and it's just going to be a matter of how what Fertitta, the owner guy, he wants to empower the rest of the team and the roster and the leadership to explore those options. But they definitely have them, and Texas isn't a bad place to live. But those guys haven't necessarily proven to be. I don't think they're the ones who are driving the conversation, in terms of recruitment for other NBA guys as well too, because of the way they played so far. And those are things, again, that role definement, that maturity, that'll get guys who want to come there. Or again, maybe you do it by some virtue of a trade and then kind of force the situation, force the hand, and maybe it steers the direction that way. But it's going to be an interesting situation, I think, for the Rockets, for years to come.
Shaw, I'll let you get into your eulogy for the Houston Rockets, but for me, what I will probably say is this is going to be an interesting offseason for the Houston Rockets. I want to see which of the young core guys, or so far core guys, which one of them goes through their transformation, right? There's always one player, whether he uses social media, he uses a contract extension, whatever. There's going to always be one player who I think is going to head and shoulders, you know, switch things up on people and have like a much different mentality, mindset, approach, which I think may lend themselves. Now, I don't know if I want to go out on a limb and start talking about, one of these guys like Jalen Brown or Kenyon Martin Jr., what of those guys can elevate themselves to say like most improved or, you know, do something, from an individual perspective that's putting them on the map. But I do feel like for us to buy into what we've been talking about and for people to buy into what they want to do, one of them is going to have to do that. And I think one of those guys will. If I had to put my money on it, I'm going to say look out for Kenyon Martin Jr. I think he's in a prime position to show his athleticism and also show that he's still, what I'm saying, um, a chip off the old man, shoulder. You know what I'm saying?
Sure.
Chip off the block, right? Watch for that grit and that chippiness exhibited. You know what I'm saying? Come next season, and see how he can establish his presence as a front court player with a lot of dynamic opportunity for the Houston Rockets. So that would be what I would probably speak to them at.
All right. Well, you know what? I will allow it, as they say.
Thank you.
I think with him having the roots of his father, somebody who's obviously done it and understand what it means to be in a functioning locker room. Maybe he can talk to Pops and say like, "Hey, how do I become a better leader and get these guys together?" And then at the same time, have them respect me because I'm out there producing on the court on a more regular basis, and not just dunking on people. I think he's definitely shown some flashes of a guy who can be more than that, and he's defending and trying to shoot the three ball here with a little bit more consistency, etc. Still only shooting 31%, unfortunately, but he's somebody who I think makes a lot of sense. Again, I'm going to go with Sengun, only because if he can take those again, if he's using the Joker as any type of model, look where Denver is. And while he is not going to go out there and become a two-time MVP, the next couple of seasons, I'm not saying that, but I think he can take strides towards galvanizing the team, understanding like, hey, I can get my buckets when I need to, but I'm going to focus on rebounding and maybe getting the other guys involved, and I can run some offense and do dribble handoffs from the from the nail and the pinch post, et cetera, et cetera. Those are things that I think can help other guys say, you know what, let's rally around this guy, and I think he has the chops and essence to potentially be able to do that. So this Rockets team is, again, they're an interesting conundrum, man. I'm rooting for them, but it's going to take a minute.
It's gonna take a minute. Well said, Shaw. Well said. They die quickly this season. Maybe they might die a little slower come next season.
That's a die slow.
Die slow. Awesome show this week, Shaw. And again, man, as always, this is why it's such an interesting time of the year, to really examine some of these teams, to give a little bit more attention, to what took place for them. I think speaks volumes about how excited we want to be, for them, especially in this offseason. And whether moves are made or guys are drafted, when they come to this team, this is what we look forward to when we have the summer league and, OTAs and things of that nature and stuff like that, because we want to see if whether or not part of the things that we're saying we'd like to see improvement on these teams, if they start to show that, like even before we even get to the, regular season tip off. We would love to see that they're in that direction, and so that's what I'm hoping for when we're talking about these guys and alluding to these teams the way that we do in our autopsy reports.
Yeah, I mean, there's no hate here, right? We absolutely want the best. We're trying to give unbiased analysis and understand, and it's great. We got some great feedback on our last autopsy report, even on the YouTube. Great Pistons fans was trying to chime in and saying, hey, he was given the butter goods because he follows the team more closely than we do. Like, we're not watching every single game. We're taking a broad stroke overview, with these autopsy, but it's definitely all love. And while we may not necessarily the best things about your favorite team, we're hopeful. We want everybody to be successful, but as I said before, somebody's got to lose. And unfortunately, these were some of the teams that were the first out this year. So again, hopefully that their die slow is a little bit longer next year. And, we're talking about them, at a latter part of the autopsy season.
I'd like to think that, they loved us so much that they wanted to first get on the table. It's like, we could look at it that way, right? We do such good work for them over the last few seasons that they have no problems with allowing us to exhume and examine them.
They said, baseline, take me now. I got you.
But come next year, do better.
Yeah.
So we don't have to come to you first. Once again, man, we'd like to thank you and yours for hopping on board with us this week for the Baseline. Callie, Warren, Shaw, we appreciate you guys. We do. And we'll catch up with you next time.